Good morning. It's the Saturday, February 8th, 2014, and I'm here at the LATV studio to introduce John Proietti for an LATV talk. And what I would like to do is introduce myself. My name is Donald Piermarini. I'm the chairman of the City Hall Historical Commission. We work with the mayor and the city council. And one of the people being introduced today is John Proietti, and he is a member of the Historical Commission. Now, just to give you a little background, a few years ago, my daughter Sarah said that her daughter, Catherine, would like an interview with Nancy and Don Piermarini about the episode that took place in 1930s Great Depression. So Catherine came to the house. We gave her a long talk. She, in turn, put together a booklet that went to the English teacher at Manchester Central High School in Manchester, New Hampshire. Well, just the other day, Sarah called again. And she said, well, Dad, I think Elizabeth would like to do something similar. And she said, do you know of anybody in Leominster that would give a talk? And I said, well, let me give it some thought. So I thought about all the members of the commission, and I came up with John Proietti. So I called Carl Piermarini at the LATV, and I said, Carl, I have a little problem. I wonder if you could solve it. I said, I'd like John Proietti to talk about mid-20th century in Leominster. And I have a granddaughter who'd like to interview him. Is it all right with you? And he said, Muggsy, I think that's a good idea. We could solve a threefold problem. One, we could have an interview with John Proietti, especially on the terrace, which is a neighborhood. And secondly, the commission will get a copy of this interview. And thirdly, of course, it'll go to your granddaughter, Elizabeth Aldrich. So at this moment, I would like to introduce both John Proietti, member of the Historical Commission in Leominster, and Elizabeth Aldrich, a junior at Central High School in Manchester, New Hampshire. You have the floor, Elizabeth.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Hi. Okay, so we're just gonna go right into the interview. Is that okay?
Okay, fine.
Okay. So when and where were you born?
I was born here in Leominster, 1926, not too far from where we're broadcasting here, and I was most of my years that we're going to talk about Depression. I would have lived through, we'll say, from 1930 to 1940. I would remember that was probably the years of the Depression, and that was my youth, and there's a lot of that I would remember.
Okay. What was your school like?
Oh, well, school. First, I went to a school within walking distance of my house. It had six grades in it, and old brick schoolhouse, very small playground, almost no playground at all, and so when I went to school there, I had the same problem that most of us I came from the Italian neighborhood. When we arrived at school in the first grade, most of us talked English, but mixed in with Italian. And it was some kind of a, I don't know what you'd call it, learning. You were learning English at the same time, right? And it was embarrassing many times because we lacked proper English, and So anyway, and most of the children that went to school with me were just about like me. They were from Italian families, right? And we all had the same problem. And back then, the teachers were very strict, very strict. There was no whispering in classrooms, and you had to behave when you went outside the classroom. Outside, we were being watched all the time. I don't know if that was in all of Leominster or not, but because our school was so restricted and so small, it was a like I said, they watched over you pretty close. And I was finally glad to get out of that school when I grew up, because there were so many more things to learn, and no, I don't know. Let's see. Oh, yes, and in those schools, now I remember, we had at recess, we had a boys' side and a girls' side.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was boys. Yes, you knew, and you couldn't cross the line, or you'd get in trouble, and we didn't have any kind of sports on our school grounds. We couldn't do anything. There was no facilities at all, and when it came time for, we'll say, the gym classes, we used to go up in the attic of the school, and all we'd learn to do was march. Oh. Yeah. So we learned to. So we were ready to, when we got up in junior high and high school later on, they were more into marching because World War II was getting close, and they were trying to teach us, about the drills that the Army had and all that. So we did a lot of marching, and then I finally got introduced to basketball. I never saw anybody play basketball till I got up to the junior high school. So there's not much I can think of. Oh.
Next question.
No, I don't. We'll have to come up with something else.
Okay, so what did you do for fun after school?
After school, well, because we lived close to home from the school, we had a short distance to go. Most of us, we all knew each other. A lot of other students were related to me, and we'd find things to do in the neighborhood. In the summertime, we'd go play ball. We had these pickup games, not much equipment, and we'd find if it wouldn't be a real baseball field, it would be just a big open space, and we'd play baseball there, and we actually played football we lived on Lincoln Terrace, the Italian section, and we played tag football, and we used the telephone posts as the football field, one to another, and we had we'd take a piece of burlap, shape it into the best we could into something like a football, and we put these rubber bands around it, and that was our football. And we didn't have no problem playing on the city street, because back then there wasn't many automobiles that would bother you. So, and we'd go around the neighborhood. We had a brook running along our street, and a bunch of us kids would go down there, run around, jump the brooks to see if we could get across without falling in, right? Yep. And when we get to these wider part of the brook, we'd get a pole and use a pole and jump across. Needless to say, we got wet more times than not. And and then in the wintertime, you could skate all. We had little tiny areas, little tiny ponds in the area, and you could go skating there. And we played hockey games, pick-up hockey games. We didn't have hockey sticks. We'd go to somewhere along the way, we'd go to a tree limb or something that looked like a hockey stick. We'd cut it off, and that was our hockey stick. And you didn't need much room for little kids to have a hockey game, but there was a number of places in the area where we could go play hockey. And we had, at that time, we had clamp skates. You didn't have no shoe. The skate clamped onto your shoe, right?
Yep.
And that was. You'll even not everybody had them. Some of the guys were playing hockey with us. Just had their just playing on it with their shoes. They didn't have a skate, right? So, and in those same little brooks there, we'd fish in them. We even dammed some of those brooks up and made a little bit of a pond. Of a pond. You could get away with it when I was a youth, because these were wide open spaces. Most of the people were, your mothers and fathers were busy with their day's work, and the kids were free to run around to do whatever they wanted to, right? Mm-hmm. So they could get in trouble, real fast on there because of that. Then you could, in the springtime or in the beginning of summer, we actually, starting at maybe the third grade, we could go up to, some of the farmers would hire us out to go help them with when they first planted their beans and carrots and vegetables, beets, and they'd hire us kids to weed them, or we used to space. I remember going up to this particular farm, we used to space the beets. We'd put our fingers there, and they said there one plant here, and you'd pull out all the other plants and the seedlings out to make room for the other ones to grow. So you try to space them 4 inches apart. And so this farmer here who hired us, he was from Sterling, so he'd come down with his truck down to Lincoln Terrace where I lived, and he hired a number of us to do this. And back then, we got 12.5 cents an hour. Oh. Right, that was a regular pay, right? Every 2 hours you get a quarter, right? Yeah. And so anyway, we did that. We did that after school, and then later on in the summer, we actually probably would go work on this farm, pick up the same vegetables that we had worked on when they first had planted them. And plus, at home, you had all your chores at home. Everybody had chickens. You had to take care of your chickens. We actually had, most of our homes would have a pig. Every year they got a new pig, they'd raise it to slaughter in November. So we had all the chores to do with that, getting the pig's food ready. We had to bring up, we had firewood in the cellar. We'd have to bring that upstairs as a chore, put it in a wood box by the wood stove. In my neighborhood, almost everybody in the neighborhood burnt wood. You burnt wood in the daytime for cooking on wood stoves, and then at night, you'd change over, you'd put coal in the same stove, and you'd fill it up with coal, so you'd have a fire going through the night. Coal lasted much longer, So when your mother got up 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, this coal was just about burnt out, and she'd start with wood doing all the cooking, Back then, most of those families in my neighborhood, I'd say there's probably 7, I'd say the average was 7 children per family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there was a lot of work. So your mom had to get up early in the morning. Very few people had washing machines or electric irons. The iron was off of the stove. You heated up an iron made out of iron. You heated it up on the stove, and your mother would do a wash in a bathtub or in a round tub, all by hand, right?
Wow, yeah.
And she made you breakfast. You can see where the mothers were really overworked in those days,
Yeah.
right? You know, and you didn't get to appreciate it till many years later, you know. But my mother didn't see a wash machine or electric iron till the late 30s.
Oh.
By then, all the kids were grown up. She
Yeah.
didn't need them as much as she did had in the past, you know.
Did your mother work?
Well, no, she did. She worked in the same building here
Oh, okay.
till she had her first baby, and that was the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
Then she had 8 more children.
Yeah.
So she did work for a short while, you know. But the mothers had a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
They did all the cooking, all the sewing. There was a lot of sewing in those days.
Mm-hmm.
They had to make clothes or try to make clothes. And back then, there was all this hand-me-down stuff. If your sister had a dress, well, you came along, or your mother'd have to, adjust it, make it fit you. So mothers were very busy, so they didn't get much rest, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Did your father work very much?
yes, he did, but he started before he came to Leominster. He came to Leominster originally, but then he ended up going and working in the coal mines out in Pennsylvania for about 10 years. Then he started having problems with his lungs in the cold, so he came back to Leominster in about 1924, 25. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was born in Leominster. Some of my family was born out in Pennsylvania. But my family was always attached to Leominster. His sisters and brothers lived here in Leominster.
Okay.
But he kept going back to Pennsylvania, and what happened, my mother would travel with him sometimes to the coal mines, and when she was ready to have a baby, she'd come back to Leominster to stay with her sisters and sister-in-laws in Leominster till she had a baby. But my father ended up with a problem with his lungs for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And between his lungs and having he had a lot of hernia problems, he had a tough time keeping a job. Most of the jobs are pretty tough, even in Leominster here, right?
Yeah.
And during the Depression, it was even worse. In fact, many days he'd go in and work 2 or 3 hours and get the work done. They'd send him home.
Yeah.
Because that's all work they had available, you know. So, in fact, what he did at one point around 1930 or so, he had a new house built in 1925, and about 1930 he couldn't afford to make the payments on it anymore.
Yeah.
So he made a deal with the bank where he just paid on the interest. So for almost 10 years he never paid anything on the main loan. He just was paying the interest. The bank didn't want the house because everybody else was having the same problem.
Yeah.
So what my father did, he rented out the basement of his house to this Italian club. My father was from around Rome, and the people from around Rome started their own club. But my father rented out the basement of his house, and it was only a bungalow, but they made the Italian club's quarters in my father's house.
Oh, wow.
But he ended up being the bartender.
Yep.
Right? He ended up making the wines. Used to make a lot. They made a huge wine cellar at my house. Still there at the house. My brother owns the house now. It was a beautiful wine cellar to make a nice bomb shelter. It was beautiful, heavily built. They had a wine press. So, and us kids had to help to make the wine. Right? My father was fortunate in this way. He had 5 sons.
Oh, yeah.
So he had a lot, because it was his job to make the wine for the club. That was what he contracted for, and so we were able to help him, make the wines at the time, and so anyway, like I said, he didn't during the Depression. He wasn't fortunate enough to have a good job because of his health. His health had a lot to do with it. But then after around 1940, he got a job molding in plastics, and he was able to handle that job. It wasn't it wasn't as rough as the other job that he was doing. So yeah, and he never got an automobile. Even though a lot of families in the neighborhood by in the middle 30s, they were all getting automobiles. My father never got an automobile till 1944, 45. That's when he got his license. The only way we got around, if it was in an automobile, it was with either my uncles who had automobiles. We'd go with, they'd haul us around to the different functions where you needed to travel some distance, So, yeah.
Did any of your siblings or you have to work full-time jobs to support your family?
You know what? In my neighborhood, the average person, the average boy or girl that came along, when they got 16 years old, very few of them went on to. They got out of school by the time they were in the ninth grade or so, and they went to work.
Oh, wow.
And some of in my family, 4 of us made it to high school, but and 4 didn't, because my 2 oldest brothers, they went to work. Because at that time my father was having a tough time. He couldn't even get, like I say, he couldn't get a regular job. And when my brothers went to work, they went to work for the WPA, which was a government program.
Yeah.
And that was to get income into the house.
Okay.
Yeah, so some of the kids made it to school, and some of us didn't. In fact, my last year of school, I went in my sophomore year. I quit school and went into the Navy. I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And so when I got out of the service in 1946. I went back to high school to get my diploma, and so at that time, like I say, I was going to school, but I also was working part-time after school. But by then, I was already paying rent to live at my house. It's not like today the kids come home and want to stay with their parents. Not in my house. If you came back to live in my father's house, you paid. He'd say, you're going to pay for your food, but your mother's going to do your ironing. You're going to pay your mother for doing your ironing. So he charged you I think he charged me maybe $20 a week.
Oh, wow.
Right, to stay at the house. This was 1946. So we were brought up to be very responsible. You had to be what they call a self-starter in my house. You couldn't wait for. My father or mother didn't want to give you orders over and over again. You just was assigned to do something. You had to do it. And you had to get it done, right?
Yep.
Or there'd be some repercussion,
Yeah. Was unemployment very high? Did you notice a lot of unemployment around your neighborhood?
Well, yes. The unemployment was. Because most of the people were getting into. Like my brothers, they went to WPA, and the other people were more or less doing odd jobs. But everybody seemed to be eking out a living one way or another,
Even the farmers, did they have to go to the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or were they okay?
Gee, I don't remember that part about it. I don't remember that part about it. I don't know how the farmers were operating back then, but there was a lot of farmers around.
Yeah.
All the open people were using up all the open spaces one way or another. But I know at one point my father, when things were getting pretty rough, when money was coming in, he went down to Lancaster here, and he bought around, I think it was about 4 sacks of potatoes, 100-pound sack of potatoes, and that particular, I think I'm going to say the winter was a long winter. It was a lot of we ate mostly potatoes and all different forms and eggs. That was most of our meals, breakfast, dinner, and supper, because that's all he could afford at the because that's all he could afford at the time. So, of course, we had chickens and chickens. We had a pig too, and that was one way kids could make money. In our neighborhood, we had a certain oak tree, and it had a different acorn. It was an edible acorn. They were more oval shaped, and we had our homemade carts, and on a cart that we made by homemade, we used to put like a soda box on it, and we'd mount it to the cart. And I remember going down to these certain acorn trees in this group, and we'd pick up these acorns because they were edible, not for people. Maybe people could eat them, I don't know, but they were for the pigs. And people loved to get them because the acorn gave you a better kind of pork, I guess. It was a better tasting pork. So I can remember going down picking acorns, and some I actually sold to my mother or father. They give me a dime or 15 cents, whatever, or even my neighbors, they'd send me out and go pick up acorns. And they'd give me a 5, 10, 15 cents to pick up these acorns. And the biggest thing in the neighborhood, though, was for kids after school was bringing in firewood. Almost everybody in the neighborhood, very few people had oil. Oil was too expensive. It was new anyway, but everybody was used to burning wood. That's the way things had been, And so what we do to the families that were too busy and the kids were growing up and we were still young enough to do this work, and we do this work cheap. We used to put the wood in the undercover or in the people's cellar. You stack it up in their cellar. They're probably 12 inches long or so they'd fit in the stove. And the way my folks got their wood, they'd buy the wood by the cord, but it would be standing as a tree. What you were doing when you was buying a tree, you'd give the farmer, whoever owned the wood, you'd give them so much per cord of wood. So what you'd do, you'd go down there, it'd be my whole family, you'd cut these trees down and make them the 4-foot lengths. You'd pile them up to 4 feet high. They were 4 feet long. You pile them 4 feet high and 8 feet long, and the farmer you were buying, the person you were buying it from, that was a cord of wood, and he charged you so much per cord. Then we, as a group, a couple of uncles and my father, they did this together. We did this as a group. We'd go down and buy all this wood, then we'd hire a truck, right, to bring the wood to your home.
Yep.
And then when you got home, you either found a way to saw these 12-foot lengths, or you hired somebody. There was people going around cutting it. But then you had to stack the wood and get it dry, undercover or in the house. Most of the people brought it in the house. And then part of your chore at home later on would be to bring the wood up from the cellar up to next to the stove. You'd have a wood box, and you'd have the wood handy there, right?
Yep.
You had a wood box, and plus you had probably a heart of coal. At the end of the day, you'd put the coal in the same stove, to keep because that fire with a coal fire would last overnight. So we did a lot of bringing wood into the house, of piling of wood. A lot of kids made money in the neighborhood doing that. Yeah. There's a lot of little things. In fact, a neighborhood store, we had a neighborhood store that always used 4 or 5 kids all summer long, because in those days, most of your goods, foodstuffs, they came in bulk. They came in big boxes, 100-pound bags and all that. Yeah. And they'd hire the kids. I remember you'd take a 100-pound bag and you'd get what they call a peck paper bag. There was you'd fill it up, and that was 15 pounds of potatoes, right? And you'd get them all ready, because people were buying the potatoes. The average person was buying them by the peck. And in the store, we were in charge of cleaning up, getting rid of all the boxes that came in, break them up, bring them out. They had a big place outdoors, big giant round iron thing that was, we'd burn all the rubbish for this, because the people in the store were busy selling to the customers, right? But you had all your beans, rice, all food stuff. It was all bulk. And you'd have to take it from the sack, pour it into a bin, then in some of that stuff, they'd have us kids, and we'd put them up in they'd give us a 5-pound bag, and we fill it up with the beans and stack them for the guy. So the neighborhood kids were able to make not much money, but enough to go to the movies.
Yeah.
Your folks didn't give you money to go to a movie. You had to go out and earn it. You want to go to a movie? Go earn some money, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't that the folks didn't want to give it to you. They didn't have it.
Yep.
You would get it sometimes, but if you wanted sweets or something like that, no way. You'd have to find a way of getting some money to buy your own sweets.
Okay. Did any of your family lose any money in the banks, or were you all
Well,
set?
you know what? Not my family, because they didn't have any money.
Yeah.
But yes, I knew that was good. I know my uncle was doing very good. He owned 3-decker houses.
Okay.
And after the banks had a problem, I guess he lost money because he never again used the bank.
Yeah.
In fact, my neighbors, most of my neighbors that I can think of, never used the bank after that, after the Depression. They kept their money in the house. They always had cash on hand, right? But that because of the banks failing, and that had a lot to do with my father not getting a job later on too, because of the banks failing and all that. All the business were having a tough time to try, to sell their products or their services. But no, so my family didn't get, but it was tough. In fact, I had a woman next door to me. She was a widow. She had lost her husband. She lost a second husband too, and she had a family to bring up, right?
Yeah.
And so to bring in money, she was doing something illegal. She was making beer and selling it.
Oh.
And this was before, and when she started that, it was before there was a law where you couldn't buy any beer or
Prohibition?
Yeah. And because of that, so that was her little bit of income and what her children could bring in, And so when they got rid of that, what'd you call it now?
Prohibition?
When they got rid of prohibition, all of a sudden she didn't have an income, and she had 5 children.
Yep.
And so what happened was the city of Leominster, the police department somewhere in there found out she was still selling beer. It was easy to find out who was selling what anyway, but they went down there and they destroyed her beer barrels.
Oh yeah.
She was at a loss. She didn't know what to do. 5 kids, right?
Yeah.
And still paying for a house. So she could not speak English. So she got Mr. Bartimo, who was very good at speaking English, right? And he knew City Hall. So he went up there with her and took her to the mayor's office and she says, she has no income. He says, your policeman broke her barrels, this and that. She has no income. And he says, so the mayor found a way of getting her son a job. He went to her oldest son got a job with the highway department. Oh, okay. Right. Yep. And that was a result of the prohibition and all that. And her being like I say, a widow. She had twice a widow. She was twice a widow too. But so you had to find a way to survive back then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are also a lot of factories around here, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This was the huge one here. DuPont's was a huge one here. Yeah. But you had a lot of factories, but from very tiny factories. A lot of people you had you had all your regular factories in Leominster that employed 10, 15, 20 people and probably even more, but you had a lot of people who started their own little business and tried to make more money. They started in their own cellars. Little machine shops here, little people making plastic articles of their own, and so there was a lot of that happening during that time. And a lot of these guys who started in their cellar ended up being very successful. I went to work with Standard Tool Company, and I worked for them for 20 years, and that was owned by Mr. Kavanaugh, but he worked here in DuPont's in their machine shop, Mr. Kavanaugh, right? But he started his own business in his cellar on Summer Street, and he ended up starting that Standard Tool Company, and they were pretty successful there for about 50 years or so. But yeah, there's a lot of people who worked here at this DuPont Viscoloid company who learned their trade here and then expanded and went on their own.
Oh yeah.
Right. And that's actually how I think maybe. I don't know if Bonnie Doyle, the guy who started this company, I don't know if that's the way he started or not. I don't know if he had money to begin with, or he just earned his way on his wits.
Did you notice any unions in these factories?
I remember unions happening.
Okay.
There was a lot of the unions were very, very. They had a big problem getting unions started. Like DuPont's never had, this DuPont company was the biggest, they never had a union. They had their own workers' council.
Oh, okay.
And if you came here, and if you said the magic word, if you said union, the next day you were out on the street.
Oh, wow.
Oh, you could not, you can't even whisper that word with most of the companies. And there was, when they went, I remember the Commonwealth Plastics, when the union arrived there, I remember there was a lot of bad blood between the workers themselves. Some of them wanted the union, some of them didn't.
Yeah.
And they were actually fighting amongst each other. I mean, fighting, fist fighting and all that. There was a lot of, that was something. As far as I'm concerned, the unions were a necessary evil. Mm-hmm. That's what I call them, because I was with the union. I was with the union probably, with the regular union, maybe about out of 45 years, I think 15 of it I was with the union. Mm. And the other times I weren't. And it's good to say about both of them, union and non-union.
Okay.
But what happened with the unions, what I didn't like about the unions was, after a while, you get the wrong people in charge of the unions, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
And a lot of money there, and they find a way to divert the money. But if you work for a private person, he's making sure he gets most of the money.
Yeah.
So the unions got established in Leominster, but it wasn't very easy, mm-hmm. and it wasn't too widespread. I'd say maybe only half of the people in Leominster had a union.
When did you work for the union, or when were you part of the union?
Well, I actually worked. Foster Grants had a union. I worked 10 years for Foster Grants. That they had a union, and I worked for. When I worked with Standard Tool, we had a workers' council too, but at the last probably 5-6 years, they voted a union in. Mm-hmm. Right, and that probably was about my 15 years of union time was with those companies. And like I said, the union, I says is I always say even to this day I say it's a necessary. You say evil. I don't know what the word is, but without them, you're at the mercy of people. Right now in this country, like, I'm not talking politics, but you got so many people, you got so many rich people and so many poor people, and you can see everybody wants everybody's looking for the big money, right? And they
Yeah.
don't care about the poor guy. So what's the poor guy to do? He joins the union.
Did you ever listen to one of Roosevelt's fireside chats? If you had
You
a
know what?
radio?
No, I don't think I wasn't interested in politics. I knew all about him. I heard
Yeah.
about him. My mother and father-in-law, they were all, you know, they were interested. They'd talk all about, you know, they'd talk about what was going on, but I wasn't interested at the time, right?
Yeah. Okay. And do you have like a vivid memory of something that happened to you or one of your family members during the Depression that changed the way you see things?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I can't think of any right now.
That's okay. But did you have enough food during the Depression? You never went hungry, did you?
Well, no. The reason we didn't go hungry was because my folks had come from Italy, and they left Italy for a reason. They left Italy because they were at the bottom of the ladder in Italy. They didn't have any kind of, they were eking out a living in Italy. You couldn't get a job, and they came to this country. So they were good at eking out a living.
Yeah.
So when they got to Leominster or whatever, they came to this country, they wouldn't have a problem because they were used to raising their own chickens, their own animals. They did all their own slaughtering. You didn't have anybody else. You didn't buy most of your meats. You had them live and you slaughtered them yourself. That was a way of life. And most of the Italians who came here were like that. So the families wouldn't go hungry just because of their work ethic. They worked hard. Like I said, in my household, we had chickens all the time. We had pigs. We had rabbits. Most of the people raised their own rabbits for food only. They weren't not pets. They were food, right?
Yeah.
I remember slaughtering, killing rabbits for food, and actually pigeons. In fact, I can remember the first time one of my first memories was when my oldest brother, who was about 9 years older than me, and he brought home 4 pigeons, common pigeons, the ones you see downtown.
Yeah.
He brought those home, and so anyway, and he told my folks, he says, I got these up to the Baptist church in Leominster here. He went up to the caretaker of the Baptist church at the time. His son was living on Lincoln Terrace, and so he talked to my brother. So they went up at nighttime, and they went up in the belfry, and the pigeons were sleeping up there, right? And they had a sack, and they grabbed it, and my brother was able to bring 4 of them home, and it was when my mother was killing chickens all the time. When it came to chickens, we raised chickens for eggs, and we had what they called poultry, too. He says, you weren't going to raise those for eggs. You were going to raise those just to eat. Yeah. Right? They never got to be full size. So anyway, when my mother was killing the chickens all these years, it was nothing for her to, if you brought home a squirrel or even a wild rabbit, she'd prepare it in a minute. So you'd go out and find food. I remember one of my brothers went hunting with somebody. He brought home, in the wintertime, he brought home some ducks that they had shot. Yeah. So there was a way of getting, you weren't going to starve as long as you. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's enough. Thank you for having an interview with me. Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.